Think you know who the deadliest gunman in the Old West was? Most people would say Billy the Kid or maybe Wild Bill Hickok. They'd be wrong. The most prolific killer of the American frontier claimed over 40 victims before his 24th birthday. And chances are you've never even heard his name mentioned in a single Western movie. But here's the thing about the real Wild West that Hollywood never got right. The truly dangerous men weren't standing in dusty streets at high noon waiting for a fair fight. They were shooting people in the back, wearing homemade bulletproof vests, and charging $2,000 per murder. Today, we're looking at 5 men who turned killing into an art form. And the truth is going to shatter every myth you've ever believed about gunslingers. Between 1850 and 1890, the American frontier was essentially lawless. You had maybe one sheriff for an entire county the size of Connecticut, federal marshals whose jurisdiction ended at invisible lines nobody could see, and vast stretches of territory where the only law was whatever the man with the gun said it was. In that vacuum, a specific type of man emerged: professional killers. Some wore badges. Some never broke a law besides murder. And some made enough money killing people that they bought ranches and retired comfortably. The gap between what you've seen on screen and what actually happened is enormous. Real gunfighters didn't square off 20 paces apart. They shot from 200 yards away with rifles. They kicked down doors at 3 in the morning. They killed men while they slept, while they ate dinner, while they played cards with their backs to the door. One victim was murdered for snoring too loud in a hotel room. Another was shot in front of his wife on their front porch. This wasn't the romantic West of John Wayne films. This was industrial-scale murder on the frontier. Let's start with someone whose name you actually recognize, though probably for the wrong reasons. James Butler Hickok became famous after killing a man named David McCandless with a single rifle shot from 75 yards away. That one shot made him a legend. Newspapers started calling him Wild Bill, and suddenly every gunfight he survived became front-page news. In 1869, he took a job as sheriff of Ellis County, Kansas, and killed 2 men in gunfights within his first month wearing the badge. The following year, he became Marshal of Abilene, one of the most violent cattle towns in the entire frontier. His tenure there ended badly when he accidentally shot his own deputy during a chaotic gunfight, forcing him to resign and move on. Here's what made Hickok different from almost every other gunman of his era. He actually participated in face-to-face, quick-draw duels. Most professional killers avoided fair fights like the plague because fair fights got you killed. But Hickok had a reputation for nerves of steel, and he cultivated that image. It made him famous. It also made him a target. On August 2nd, 1876, he was playing poker in a saloon in Deadwood, South Dakota, when a man named Jack McCall walked up behind him and shot him in the back of the head. Hickok died instantly, slumping forward onto the table while still holding his cards. 2 aces and 2 eights, now forever known as the dead man's hand. The fastest gun in the West died without ever seeing his killer's face. There's your romantic Wild West. Now let's talk about Henry McCarty, better known as Billy the Kid. Legend says he killed 21 men, 1 for each year of his short life. The real number was probably closer to 9 or 10, which honestly is still remarkable for someone who died at 21 years old. His first confirmed kill happened in August 1877, about a month before his 18th birthday. He got into a fight with a man named Francis Cahill during a poker game in Arizona. And when things got physical, McCarty shot him dead. He fled the territory and never came back. What's interesting about Billy the Kid is that people who actually knew him said he wasn't mean or cruel. They described him as brave, funny, loyal to his friends, and someone who got into the outlaw life more out of circumstance than choice. He became a key player in the Lincoln County War, a vicious range war in New Mexico territory that left dozens dead. During one ambush in April 1878, his group killed Lincoln County Sheriff William Brady and one of his deputies right in the street. That made Billy one of the most wanted men in the territory. After being captured and sentenced to hang, Billy pulled off an audacious escape by killing both of his guards and riding out of town. He stayed on the run for 3 more months before Sheriff Pat Garrett tracked him down to Fort Sumner. On July 14, 1881, Garrett entered a darkened bedroom where Billy was staying and shot him dead. Billy was 21 years old. His legend, however, took on a life of its own. For decades afterward, con men would show up in various towns claiming to be Billy the Kid, somehow having survived that night. Some were looking for fame. Others were likely running scams. At least one was nearly hanged before proving he was too old to actually be McCarty. But now we're going to shift from outlaws to something much darker. Professional assassins. Men who killed for money as casually as you'd accept a paycheck for any other job. Thomas Horn Jr. was a government scout during the Apache campaigns, then worked for the Pinkerton Detective Agency, tracking down train robbers. By 1894, he'd grown bored with detective work and signed on with the Wyoming Cattlemen's Association as what we'd now call a contract killer. The Wyoming cattle barons had been fighting a vicious war against small ranchers, sheep herders, and anyone they suspected of rustling cattle. After the disastrous Johnson County War brought them terrible publicity, they decided to stop hiring armies and start hiring assassins instead. Tom Horn was perfect for the job. He was an expert tracker, an excellent shot, and completely comfortable working alone. He'd ride into an area, set up a position 200 yards from his target's homestead, and wait. When the target stepped outside, Horn would shoot him with a rifle. Most victims never knew what hit them. No dramatic confrontations, no final words, just a rifle crack from a distant hillside and another body on the ground. Horn's signature was placing a small rock under the victim's head after death, proof to his employers that the job was done. He charged between $500 and $700 per killing. In 1900, historians believe Horn murdered 2 suspected cattle thieves named Matt Rash and Esom Dart in Browns Park, where Colorado, Utah, and Wyoming meet. Both were shot from ambush. Both had rocks placed under their heads. But Horn's career came to an end on July 18, 1901, when 14-year-old Willie Nickel was found shot to death near his family's homestead. The boy had been killed by a single rifle shot, and a rock was placed beneath his head. Horn was arrested based largely on a drunken confession he supposedly made to a detective, though many historians question whether that confession was real or fabricated. Some believe Horn mistook the boy for his father, who was the actual target. Others think the Wyoming establishment deliberately convicted Horn for a crime he didn't commit because they wanted to be rid of a man who knew too many of their secrets. Either way, on November 20th, 1903, the day before his 42nd birthday, Tom Horn was hanged in Cheyenne using a special water-powered gallows. Whether he killed Willie Nickel or not, there's no question he murdered many others. If Tom Horn represents calculated professionalism, then James Brown Miller represents pure evil. People called him Deacon Jim because he attended the Methodist Church regularly and never smoked or drank alcohol. He'd sit in the front pew on Sunday morning, Bible in hand, singing hymns. Then on Monday, he'd murder someone for money. Miller claimed to have killed around 50 people, though confirmed numbers are lower. What's truly chilling is that his killing spree may have started when he was just 8 years old. In 1869, Miller's grandparents were found dead in their home. Though he was never prosecuted, locals always believed the boy had killed them. His first confirmed murder as an adult came at age 22 when a man named John Coop was killed by a shotgun blast while sleeping in his bed. Miller was tried, convicted, and sentenced to life in prison. But his attorneys got the conviction reversed on a technicality. That pattern would repeat throughout his entire career. Commit murder, get arrested, walk free. Miller developed a reputation in Texas and Oklahoma as a man who would kill anyone for the right price, which ranged from $150 to $2,000 depending on the target. He had a peculiar professional pride about his work. He always used a shotgun because it was more reliable at close range, and he wore a large metal plate under his coat covering his chest and vital organs. This crude bulletproof vest saved his life multiple times when rivals tried to kill him. The bullets would hit the plate, and Miller would pretend to be mortally wounded, only to track down his attacker later and finish the job. In 1902, he killed a lawyer named James Jarrett. In 1904, he followed a man named Frank Ford to a hotel and shot him in an upstairs restroom. In 1906, he murdered a lawman in front of the man's wife. Each time, he either escaped conviction or was never arrested at all. His luck finally ran out in 1909. Miller was hired by local ranchers for $1,700 to kill a former deputy U.S. Marshal named Gus Bobbitt. On February 27, 1909, Miller shot Bobbitt with both barrels of his shotgun. Before dying, Bobbitt identified his killer. This time, Miller was arrested along with the men who hired him. The citizens of Ada, Oklahoma, knew that the evidence against Miller and his accomplices might not be enough for conviction. They'd watched too many killers walk free on technicalities. So in the early morning hours of April 19, 1909, a mob overpowered the jailers, dragged Miller and 3 others to a nearby livery stable, and lynched all 4 men. As they placed the rope around his neck, Jim Miller's last words were, "Let her rip." The Deacon of Death died swinging from a barn rafter. But if you want to know who the absolute deadliest gunfighter in American history was, you need to know about John Wesley Hardin. His father was a Methodist preacher who named his son after the founder of Methodism. That's about where the religious influence ended. Hardin killed his first man at age 15, claiming self-defense after a fight with a freedman in Texas. Rather than face trial, he fled, and when Union soldiers tried to arrest him, he killed at least one of them, possibly as many as 4. Over the next few years, Hardin became a killing machine. He shot a Texas state police officer and escaped. He traveled to Abilene, Kansas, where he allegedly had a confrontation with Wild Bill Hickok himself and somehow walked away alive. But here's the story that really shows you what kind of man Hardin was. While staying overnight at a hotel, he was awakened by a man snoring loudly in the next room. Hardin grabbed his pistol, fired a shot through the wall, and killed the man. He murdered someone for snoring. During the Sutton-Taylor feud, one of Texas's bloodiest range wars, Hardin killed the leader of the opposition, a former state police captain named Jack Helm. In May 1874, he killed Charles Webb, the deputy sheriff of Brown County, Texas. The townspeople were so outraged that they formed a mob and lynched Hardin's brother and 2 of his cousins. Hardin fled to Florida, but in 1877, Texas Rangers tracked him down and brought him back to face justice. At his trial, Hardin claimed to have killed 42 men. Contemporary newspapers credited him with 27 confirmed kills. He was sentenced to 24 years in prison. While incarcerated, he studied law and wrote an autobiography, though historians note he had a habit of exaggerating and outright fabricating stories about his exploits. Hardin was pardoned in 1894 after serving 16 years. He appeared to be improving his life after becoming a practicing lawyer in El Paso. However, old habits are hard to break. John Selman, an El Paso police officer, arrested his girlfriend in 1895. Hardin lost his temper and threatened Selman in public for disturbing his girl. Hardin was at the Acme Saloon on August 19, 1895, playing dice. 4 sixes to beat, were his final words. John Selman entered the saloon just before midnight, approached Hardin from behind, and promptly killed him by shooting him in the back of the head with a Colt 45. Selman then shot Hardin 3 more times while he lay lifeless on the ground. The deadliest gunfighter in the history of the American West died exactly the way he'd killed so many of his own victims, shot in the back without warning. He was 42 years old, so that's the reality of the Wild West's most brutal gunslingers. These weren't heroes. They weren't noble outlaws fighting against injustice. They were murderers, assassins, and psychopaths operating in a time and place where law enforcement was thin and justice was often delivered by whoever had the fastest gun or the best lawyer. John Wesley Hardin racked up more confirmed kills than some military units. Tom Horn turned murder into a business transaction with pricing tiers. Jim Miller attended church between contract killings, and most of them died violently themselves, proving that the gun was ultimately a tool that turned on its user.